Background, some of this you have seen before in the previous TSG meeting. And I'm having a little trouble with the slides here. Here we go. We'll have some study updates based on the monitoring and so on that we're doing, and then probably the bulk of the new information this time will be the future modeling and outcomes and updates from that from Craft Water. We have done some stakeholder engagement since our last meeting. We have an interim report that I'll talk briefly about, and then we're open for discussion. So the team, the project is being led by the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments. Myself, Matt Rich at WSP. I am the overall project manager for the project, and we have, of course, several, quite a bit of support here with stakeholder coordination and technical review with the Council for Watershed Health, Ureli and Bell, modeling, Brianna Datai with Craft Water, and monitoring and reporting here with Jeremy and Kimberly, and coordination by Brenda Stevens with all WSP. So that's the basic project team. Of course, there's plenty of others supporting us in those roles. And again, the introduction, why are we doing this study in the first place? And so we know from previous studies, SWRP in particular, that wildfires produce pollutants and both aerially deposited particulates, as well as potentially fire retardants and suppressant chemicals, but also sediment and ash. And nutrients and metals have been documented at much higher rates following wildfires. PAHs are one thing, the aromatic hydrocarbons, but nitrogen and metals and phosphorus, as you can see by the arrow on the left, can get dramatically higher in post-fire runoff. Combine that with the critical need for the upper LA River watershed to address exactly those things, metals and nutrients, because of increasing TMDL compliance deadlines. As you can see on this timeline, some of these deadlines have already come and gone, and others are coming up very, very quickly. March of 2024, and then up and through 2028 for wet weather compliance on these, and on these metals and nutrients constituents. And if many of those are coming from wildfires, the watershed group wants to be able to understand what is going to be the impact and what can we do to comply with these TMDLs, given that there may be some impact with increased wildfires and discharge. So that's the purpose of this study. And what we hope to provide by doing this study will really better inform BMP design. And that's kind of the heart of what we're trying to do here, is understand how these effects happen, how long it takes for the effects of these wildfires to enter the surface water, and what can we do about it? How can we design BMPs to improve our water quality based on the results of fires? So we're going to do that by identifying and designing effective management strategies. We're going to inform the community on the impacts of wildfires on water quality, and the modeling ultimately will predict the impacts on water quality from future fires and other potential climate change scenarios. As expected, the wildfires get larger and more extensive and more frequent. So the approach to this study, and most of you have seen this before, but just to kind of rehash, it's been a while. We start with the Safe Clean Water funding, again, the Safe Clean Water funded project. We've done historical data review. We've coordinated with a number of other studies, designed a monitoring plan, a work plan that went out about a year ago. We've got some comments from our technical advisory committee, incorporated those. We are currently conducting monitoring. We conducted monitoring last year. We conducted monitoring this year. We're actually out there right now. And to collect data very specific to this study. That was, these sites were designed specifically to for this study to look at those. We're using a lot of other monitoring data, as Brianna will talk more about, from other monitoring programs and historical data, but we do have some that was designed specifically for this. We've been through technical advisory and data analysis. That's ongoing, part of this meeting, and the interim report that's out right now. We're doing that. And then modeling fire effects and climate change. I should probably have a yellow arrow on there too, because Brianna has got started. And this entire time, we are trying to communicate with the regional board and trying to make sure that the regional board understands what we're doing, and any collaboration, any advice that they have as well. And those have been going well. We've had a number of meetings. I think we meet quarterly and been holding those. So those have been very good, very productive meetings. So the monitoring overview, and again, I'm talking about the monitoring that was designed specifically for this study and not just all of the monitoring data that we have, which Brianna will talk about in a few minutes. But we have dry weather monitoring, wet weather monitoring, and a bioassessment monitoring, which of course is conducted during dry weather. And both of these we completed the first year of monitoring last year, and these were all completed. And we've now started the monitoring for this year, which is the second year of the monitoring, and then that's the total of the monitoring designed for this study. So when we get through with this year's monitoring, we'll turn that data over to Brianna for the final modeling efforts. Excuse me. And there's questions. The reasons we're doing these three different types of monitoring are we're looking at how post-fire runoff impacts contaminant loading, and that's a lot of what we see in dry weather, and especially this is both runoff, from burned watersheds as well as aerially deposited loads and contaminants. And with the wet weather, it's pretty similar, but we're looking to really understand how the metals and nutrients are different in burned areas as opposed to unburned areas. And with the bioassessment monitoring, we're looking at how long these effects persist. Once a fire burns an area, how long does it take for the bugs and the foliage and all of that to recover? And bioassessment will help us figure that part out. What we're analyzing for and what we're using in the study, even whether it's specifically this study's monitoring program or other historical studies, the data that we're pulling from those are basic field water quality parameters, kind of the traditional things: pH, temperature, turbidity, hardness, that kind of thing. Metals, of course, and copper and zinc are the two primary ones, but we are looking at a number of other metals that could come from or could result from fires, that fires could not produce, but release into the environment through burning of the foliage and soil heating up and so on. We're also looking for the nutrients. Ammonia, again, nitrogen and phosphorus are the two that we're most concerned with, or total nitrogen, total phosphorus. Those are the ones that the TMDLs address, and those are some of the largest issues. We're looking at that. We are looking for chlorophyll to help determine where this is coming from. Is there any chlorophyll, sort of unburned material washing into the waterway? And PAHs, which these are hydrocarbons that formed as part of the burning process. The monitoring locations that we chose, again, for this study, there's other monitoring locations throughout the Upper LA region watershed that were being used for data, but for the ones that we're conducting monitoring on, you see these are possibilities. There's three maps here for the dry weather, wet weather, and bioassessment. And these are our potential sites based on where the fires are. So we started this study. The Bobcat fire had just happened in 2020, and that's the latest. Fortunately, that's the latest large fire that CAL FIRE lists in the LA area. So we've kept those sites until then. Now, if another fire does happen, we will move those locations to go try to get data immediately from that fire. But this has given us an opportunity to see how things change over time from that large Bobcat fire, and see a couple of years later, are we still seeing the effects from that? And the bioassessment and monitoring, again, similar. We could choose any of these locations based on where a fire may happen. We're sticking with our original ones closest to the Bobcat fire because that is the most recent fire. Just some pretty pictures here. So we had some dry weather sampling. This is what these look like in dry weather. So there is definitely flow. And even though the Arcadia wash on the right-hand side, that's pretty thin flow, there was enough active flow that we were able to get a sample out of that without scraping up all the muck at the bottom. We were just able to get a water sample. Similar stuff on the second dry weather event. Arcadia wash, this one had a little bit more water. But some, a little bit of flow in here during dry weather. This is June, so it hadn't rained since April or something, and there's still a lot of flow. So that's coming from somewhere, and we were able to sample and analyze that. And these results, I realize it's just a bunch of numbers, but if you look at these, they're actually these numbers aren't that high. And we did a comparison, just kind of an informal comparison, and a lot of these copper and zinc numbers and nutrient as well as nutrient numbers really are similar to what we see in unburned areas in the past, which means that that's pretty good. Actually, it does looks like we're not seeing in this set of data, we're not seeing a whole heck of a lot of influence from that bobcat fire. As you can see, some of these J values in here, there's a lot of them on the zinc row. There's a lot of J values. If you're not familiar with the data, J means that it's not exactly a non-detect, but it means it's a very low value that couldn't be quantified accurately by the laboratory because it's so low. So again, these are pretty small numbers, and not that they're, I mean, it'd be wonderful if they were zeros, but my point is that we're not seeing a whole lot of effect from the fire in this data set. And similarly, we'll get the same thing in kind of wet weather. So here are a couple of photos of the wet weather. And as I mentioned earlier, we actually have crews out there as we're speaking right now, with this rain coming in today, hoping to get the first wet weather event of this season. So that's kind of exciting. We thought it was a pretty unpredictable storm and kind of difficult to decide whether we should try for it or whether that was just going to be a waste of time and money. We went for it, and we're hoping to catch it hopefully today, and hopefully hopefully we'll be able to wrap up around 10, 11, 12 o'clock tonight, and have some solid samples. That's the plan.
Looks like we have one question from Jerry.
Mm-hmm. Who else?
I can't see the screen or the question. So
okay, I'll be a little more direct and letting you know. In the dry weather flows, obviously we have both recharge and replenishment water that occasionally gets discharges to at least some of these. I'm not sure that it's critical to your analysis, but you may want to at least let it be known that some of these things, such as I believe the 194 gauge saw pit wash, Peck Road drain, do convey flows that may be coming from replenishment water or recharge water from Morris. Thank you.
No, Jerry, that's a good comment. You're absolutely right. And and so in many ways, no, this water, we realize that this water may not be flowing directly from the Bobcat Fire burn area. Okay, so what we're looking for, in fact, there is a dam in the way, at least some of these locations, which would change things. So really, this is looking more, the dry weather sampling that we're doing, again, designed for this study, is really the value to would be from aerial deposition, or if it's getting into the water supply some other way. But you're absolutely correct. There are other discharges in here that are not coming from directly from natural springs flowing from Bobcat Fire. That's a good caveat. Okay, talk about the dry weather results, the wet weather, some photos. Wet weather results are kind of similar story to the dry weather in that these are higher, a little bit higher values, but we're not seeing chlorophyll, which again is probably a result of what I'm saying, is that these may be downstream of the Bobcat burn fire area, but we're not receiving the natural water body flowing into these channels from that area. So it's not a big surprise not to see a whole lot of chlorophyll. The zinc and copper, those are a little bit higher. Those are honest detections, but they're still not dramatically huge numbers. And so again, they compare, when we did an informal comparison, they compare to unburned areas from other studies. The PAHs are a bit higher. And so we generally suspect wet weather concentrations to be a little bit higher because it's washing from a larger area. Again, the effect that Jerry was just mentioning from other discharges and replenishment and so on is a smaller percentage of the water that we're sampling, and that because that water is relatively clean. So anyway, so they're a little bit higher, but again, they still compare pretty favorably to unburned areas and don't look like some of the burned areas that have been seen in other studies. And we've done bioassessment, and so this one was actually, they're not in great shape, but the overall what is it? I'm sorry, California. The acronym slipping my name right now, but the CSCI condition is likely intact. So they do have some poor biological index rating, and what that means is these bugs you see down on the bottom, they're looking at the diversity of the species as well as the tolerance of the species to pollution. So if you see a lot of highly pollution tolerant bugs, but none of the ones that are very sensitive to pollution, it kind of shows up as well. The water's probably polluted. And that's what that IBI rating says by calling it poor. It says that there are a lot of the insensitive bugs and not very many of the sensitive ones. So that's where that comes from. So these two locations haven't fared that great, but whether the results are from fires or not, that still requires some more analysis that we haven't gotten through yet. So anyway, that's information for us for now. In general, they're likely intact, which is fairly good news, but the IBI rating is concerning. We'd like to figure out a bit more about what may be behind that. Okay, that's what I have to talk about for the introduction to the study and kind of the background of the study and the monitoring that we've conducted directly for the study. Next, we'll move on to modeling. But before we do, are there any other, Jerry or anybody else, do you have any other questions on the monitoring or the background or the purpose?
I think it's the CSCI is California Stream Condition Integrity or something like that.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds right. Sorry, it slipped my mind.
And this was a really good year and a weird year in those streams. We had so much flow. I'm wondering, some years you get the washout. I don't remember how long the good storm was prior to the day you went out, but that may have upset some of the little guys. May have got washed downstream.
The bioassessment was an extended dry period before we did the bioassessment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Any other questions or comments on monitoring? We can also have a discussion afterwards too, but at this point. Okay, well, hearing none, I will pass it on to Brianna to discuss modeling.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So for the modeling focus of the study, really, as Matt kind of introduced, our intent is to look at the broader potential impacts to stormwater runoff and the associated pollutants if these fires were to occur more frequently and directly impact the upper LA River watershed. So the first thing that I'm going to touch on here was to try and inform our potential model scenarios representing those fire impacts. Though we're waiting for Matt's team's data, we did first compile the available data where we do have historic fires that have impacted Southern California. So what's shown on the maps here are the historic data analysis that we've started to, again, really look at what that range of potential model adjustments could be to characterize these fire effects. So the two maps, again, show where there's monitoring stations that we have collected that historic data from. So the monitoring stations are the blue dots, and then their respective drainage areas are outlined in purple. And then you can see the associated fires in the region where we did focus on where there was available data within 2 years after the fire. In some cases, we were able to compile data for these sites prior to the fire, but much of the data that we were able to compile only had observations post-fire, so that's a consideration. You can also see on the maps that we've compiled the burn severity information for each of the applicable fires from the monitoring trends in burn severity gridded data set. So what's shown here, essentially the red is the higher severity areas, yellow is classified as moderate severity, and then green is low severity. So this was a key as I get into the details on the data analysis. So we've gone through kind of this preliminary analysis. I will note, as shown on the bottom here, there were some additional data sources that we became aware of with California State University Northridge that monitored sites in Malibu Creek, as well as the Santa Susana laboratory, who had given some presentations on additional sampling that was done for the Woolsey fire. So our team has reached out to those main contacts to potentially incorporate their available data into our database. One thing I'll note that as we are kind of In the final stages of the data analysis, if there is any additional, post-fire monitoring efforts that folks are aware of in Southern California, we do still want to be aware of those and potentially incorporate those in our inventory. So let's see if I can actually control the slides here. Might be slightly delayed. Oh, there we go. So for the data analysis itself, the main pollutants that we're focused on are sediment, nutrients, and metals. So again, because we're trying to inform our model parameterization, we broke down the data based on the variables that we intend to represent in our modeling. So that's mainly the percent of burned area and burn severity. Then we're also factoring in the proximity of the burned area to an assessment point and the time after the burn impact. In the historical data analysis, we also characterized all this information with the historic fires and the monitoring data that we compiled. And we're also breaking things down separately for dry weather and then categories of wet weather based on the total precipitation in any of the associated storm events with the monitoring data. So I'll kind of walk through a number of different stats and plots that we looked at and using different methods. I'll only show kind of a subset here, but there's definitely more information included in the interim report, which you should have received. But before I get into that, I do just want to caveat, all of this is still based on relatively small sample size, particularly when we get into each of the specific constituents. And there's also many other confounding factors that we recognize across the data that we're analyzing. So really there's no statistically significant conclusion that we're making here as I kind of walk through this data, but the data does provide us context on the potential impacts that we're kind of using as guidelines as we proceed with the modeling scenarios. So I'll start up here just showing the results for the total suspended solids. So we're going to look at a number of these box and whisker plots across the different constituents. So just to start off to kind of orient yourself, what we're showing, if you look at the first plot of the burned area versus the total suspended solids on the left, on the far left-hand side, this is the concentrations of total suspended solids measured before any fire impacts. And then on the right-hand side are the concentrations measured after the fire impacts. Again, looking specifically within 2 years after that fire occurred. So we further again broke these down into the horizontal boxes that are by the dry weather samples, the wet weather samples where the precipitation was less than 0.3 inches, and then wet weather samples where the precipitation was more than 0.3 inches. Finally, we also categorized the data based on low burned area or high burned area, where the high burned was defined if more than 50% of the monitored drainage area was burned. So this does not mean anything really in terms of the before fire panel that you see here, but it is intended for comparison purposes as we're looking at the same equivalent after fire areas where there were higher kind of ratios that were burned in the monitoring drainage area. And then a similar plot is shown replacing that burn area with the burn severity on the far right, where the low versus high burn severity was defined based on a burn severity ratio, again, from that monitoring trends in burn severity defined classes. So if we had a ratio over 1, that indicated that the majority of the burn was classified as moderate or high severity. And then anything less than 1 indicated that the majority of the burn was unburned or low severity. So just getting into some of the initial observations, specifically for total suspended solids, we do see a bit of a trend in the higher burned areas. There was a higher range of TSS concentrations observed and a significant increase to what had been observed previously in the same areas. Not surprisingly, as Matt already kind of mentioned, as this is an observation we can really make across any of the constituents, we do see an increase in concentrations with increasing precipitation across the data that we looked at. And then in addition for the TSS, if we look at the burn severity plot, there was a higher median and higher range in concentrations under the higher burn severity category. So ultimately, when we're looking at sediment, we are seeing that trend where higher burned area and higher severity categories did have higher overall TSS concentrations observed, again, bracketing within those 2 years after the fire. So then next, if we look at phosphorus, these plots have similar categories broken down by before and after the fire, and then the dry and wet weather categories. But here we did want to look at if there were any, linear regressions that we could pull from. This specifically, we looked at this along the burned area, but we also looked at it with burn severity, which is shown here on these plots, where again, anything above 100% for the burn severity indicates that there was more area classified as moderate or high severity. And then the 0% indicates essentially unburned. So the plot on the left is showing for the orthophosphate, and then we have total phosphorus on the right. We did see a slight increase in concentrations with increasing burn severity. But again, kind of the caveat I made at the beginning here, this is still based on pretty limited data. And there really was no direct linear relationship that we could pull from this data. Another way, again, to kind of go back to those box and whisker plots for looking at phosphorus. Again, here, both of these are just for total phosphorus. We did show kind of overall higher concentrations in the after fire observations. We also see that the greatest range in total phosphorus concentrations, and therefore the highest concentrations overall, were in the high burn severity areas. Then next for nitrogen here, we had more data available post-fire for nitrogen and the associated constituents as compared to most of the other constituents that we were looking at. The plot shown here for nitrate, and it's worth noting, I think, that there were more instances that exceeded 10 milligrams per liter after the fires for nitrate, where actually no samples exceeded that limit before the fires. We also, again, generally see higher concentrations after the fires. But as mentioned, there really was limited data that we had prior to the fires. And you can see that data available prior was only during those wet weather conditions. So we didn't have any dry weather available pre-fire. Then if we move to the metals next, so in the metals analysis, we did break down all the data based on dissolved, particulate, and total metal measurements. So just starting with zinc here for the dissolved zinc measurements, we did see more variability and also higher ranges in concentrations, again, after the fires. I would say one of our more interesting results was for the particulate metals. So for particulate zinc shown here, we do clearly see higher concentrations after the fires as compared to before. Again, I would say after for all of the metals that we looked at, primarily zinc, lead, and copper, and cadmium, for these particulate measurements, we did see this clear distinction in the after fire measurements. But I will note that the only places that we had that were only in the high burn severity areas. And as you can see, it's still a relatively small sample size that we were looking at for those. And then for lead shown here, we show again the dissolved measurements on the left. There's generally higher concentrations again after the fire. And then for the total lead, again, we have higher concentrations, or the highest concentrations that are shown in the high burn severity areas. Copper was essentially the very same story as we had for lead, again, with the higher concentrations observed for both the dissolved and total copper in the after fire scenarios. So I think the overall takeaways from this initial data analysis really start with the fact that, again, I've mentioned multiple times, we're looking at a limited sample size, with most of our data was actually available under wet weather from the post-fire sampling that was compiled. In many cases, we also had, limited observations in the same locations prior to any of the fire impacts. So we don't necessarily have that kind of direct comparison at specific sites. Ultimately, we really had no linear relationships with burn severity or burned area that we were able to establish. But as I've mentioned, we do see this general increase in pollutant concentrations across the different data that we were breaking down that we can use in terms of kind of guidelines, as I mentioned, for the modeling of the fire effect scenarios. So with that, I'll kind of transition into the overall framework of the modeling and sort of our next steps now and using this data as we progress in the study. So I believe we presented this graphic in the past, and really it shows the overview of our model framework. So the modeling will first characterize these post-fire landscape scenarios within the Upper LA River watershed model. We'll then combine those post-fire scenarios with the climate change projections to look at the potential changes to the baseline pollutant loads, with, again, a focus on the total runoff volumes, sediment, metals, and nutrients. Next, the model framework will look at how these baseline changes would impact the expected performance of BMPs that are planned within the watershed. So the focus will be on evaluating impacts to constructed and currently planned BMPs that have been identified by the Watershed Management Group in this area. We are going to make sure that we include a variety of the types of BMPs that are being implemented or considered for the different stormwater management strategies in the watershed. Then finally, the range of the expected pollutant loads reduced by these BMPs under those different post-fire landscape changes and the climate change scenarios will be compared to the existing water quality targets. And ultimately, we expect that this will help to inform, more resilient management programs and strategies by assessing which are going to be best to improve your water quality under these potentially changing conditions. So if we dive a little bit deeper on how the modeling will be conducted to represent the potential changes to the baseline conditions, really the foundation of our modeling is the LSPC model, which is consistent with the models that are used for the watershed management programs in the region. So this schematic just represents, if we're looking at a simple one subwatershed within our LSPC model, each subwatershed is broken up into the hydrologic response units, or HRUs, and simply put, those HRUs represent the land use and the land cover characteristics within that subwatershed. So at a high level, the model is really run by the precipitation and evapotranspiration inputs that as precipitation falls on our subwatershed, this generates runoff from the HRUs that is transported into a reach or stream of the subwatershed. And this generates runoff, again, from all these land uses into the stream. Stream can also generate its own pollutants transported through, and it also facilitates the routing between the subwatersheds and ultimately summarizes the full baseline pollutant loads at the bottom of our larger watershed. So if we kind of take this basic schematic of what our current model is set up as, when we transition to representing the post-fire landscape changes, we're actually adjusting those defined HRUs, or that land use and land cover representation, to really represent these hypothetical burned areas. So this, in some cases, will completely replace certain HRUs, as you can kind of see up here with HRU1. In other cases, just a portion of a defined HRU might be updated, as you can see with HRU2. But ultimately, we're going to look at a range kind of varying how much area is impacted by this burn. And ultimately, these are going to be essentially a new class of burned HRUs with their own defined parameterization. And that parameterization of the burned HRUs will also be varied based on different assumptions about high or low burn severity that, again, we're going to vary similar to the area that we're covering with these HRU changes. And so as, again, we have the loading that will happen from each of these HRUs transported into the stream, and again, see what the change is in terms of our overall baseline pollutant loading at the watershed scale. Then on top of this, as I mentioned, with the landscape changes, we're also combining into the climate change projections. And so that's really the adjustment in terms of the input values for the precipitation and the evapotranspiration. And so we'll layer on these different projections in terms of the climate change models to see how that further influences the changes in the baseline loading that could happen in these watersheds. So then I'm going to dive one more layer deeper on the burned HRUs and the adjustments to the parameterization here. So ultimately, the watershed model is comprised of the hydrology, sediment, and water quality modules. So in the hydrology model, we're really representing the basic functions and processes of the hydrologic cycle. So some of the key parameters that we're looking at in terms of adjustment factors are the interception storage, where we're expecting a decrease in vegetation after the fires. Also, the infiltration is another key one, where we are, for example, expecting that you could get a hydrophobic layer that would decrease your infiltration directly after fires. In the sediment model, there are separate land-based and stream-based parameters, but this is mainly, the buildup and wash-off equations that we're representing. And based on what I kind of showed earlier, on some of the observations, we're going to expect that for the burned HRUs, we'll have more sediment that will be transported downstream. And then finally, for the water quality module, most of the other pollutants that we're looking at are represented as sediment associated. So we're mostly looking at if there's an adjustment to those potency factors based on any of the historic observations. But then there are other factors that will run scenarios for. In particular, as I think was mentioned, is the atmospheric deposition. So we'll see kind of what the influence would be if we have significant increase in atmospheric deposition from any nearby fires that might influence the overall watershed loading. So to kind of just summarize here, the different post-fire model scenarios, ultimately, we're going to be looking at the variables in terms of the burned area, the burn severity, and the proximity to assessment points. For each of these, we're going to have a more minimal or average scenario that will represent for each variable versus a worst case scenario. And then for the modeling purposes, we're going to run every combination of these different variables. So as we kind of look through all of this, as we combine these together, it'll be 8 total post-fire model scenarios that we will have represented. And then for the climate change, again, we are going to be basing these scenarios on changes to the precipitation and evapotranspiration inputs to the watershed model. We are looking to use the representative concentration pathways, or the RCP projections, in terms of 4.5 and 8.5, which are the moderate and high projections for the CO2 emissions. Within this, there's a number of different models. There are 4 that are really recommended when we're looking at stormwater in particular. And so we're going to look at these 4 different models across both the 4.5 and the 8.5 scenario to see, again, what those projections are in terms of the changes to precipitation in particular, and then evapotranspiration as well. This just shows kind of a snapshot here of the changes in the precipitation in the LA River watershed using downscaled projections for the RCP 4.5 model scenarios. And specifically, this data is looking at 2030 through 2060. So across the 4 models, you can see that we're looking at modeling. There is variability. Oh, go back. There is variability, I think, in terms of the overall projections. See if I can go back. Yeah. But the number of storm events is essentially similar to what the current conditions are. We also see that the average rainfall per storm event was relatively consistent with some of the current conditions experienced in the region. What is different from the current conditions is anticipating higher intensities per storm events in short amount of time, and then more back-to-back storms as well, potentially occurring, that can significantly influence the pollutant loading. So ultimately, again, we're going to take our 8 model scenarios that we have from the post-fire landscape changes, layer that with these 8 climate change model projections. So we'll end up with 64 model scenarios that we're going to look and run through to see the potential impacts on the conditions in the upper LA River watershed. And so I know there's a lot of technical details, but I think that kind of wraps up the updates that we have in the modeling section. And so I can answer any questions or any other input that folks have. All right. I don't think I'm hearing any, but also a lot of this detail is included in the interim report. So if there's questions later on, I'm happy to answer those as well. I think with that, I will turn it over to Belle.
Brianna, just press control. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Belle Zhang with the Council for Watershed Health, and I'm supporting with our stakeholder engagement. So overall, we shared this in our last technical stakeholder group meeting, but our overall stakeholder goals are to facilitate data sharing, collaboration with other closely related studies, share the study's results with impacted stakeholders, and ultimately develop effective management strategies as resulting from the study. And lastly, integrating important feedback from decision makers and interested parties on potential policy changes. And part of that feedback process is collecting feedback from you folks at these meetings. So thank you all very much for coming, and we really look forward to hearing your feedback throughout this process. And so in the beginning, we are targeting a couple different stakeholder group types. That includes technical stakeholders like SWRP and USGS, as well as universities. Affected parties who probably are concerned about policy implications, such as the Water Board and the ULAR group. Outcome stakeholders, such as the National Park Service and CAL FIRE and tree people, who might be more interested in the actual results of the study, and as well as general outreach, who can just to get more information on how fire affects the watershed. And so our stakeholder engagement is broken up into 6 phases. The first phase being meetings with regional board, phase 2 being early engagement with TAC, phase 3 being technical stakeholder group meetings, phase 4 being site and BMP tours, phase 5 presenting the study at symposium conferences, as well as a final concluding webinar at the end. And SGB COG so graciously maintains the study fact sheets on their website in the link below. So, if you guys want to share this study with other folks, that's a great place to refer folks to, as we have a pretty good little summary of what the study is and what it's doing. And so first, for phase 1, we meet quarterly with the regional board. Thank you so much, regional board, for meeting with us every 3 months or so. And these are the meetings we've done so far. So far, we've had 5 meetings with them where we update them on study progress, as well as getting their feedback and advice on how to proceed with the study. And our meetings are planning to continue through the end of the study period quarterly. Phase 2 are semi-monthly meetings with the technical advisory group, and so far we've had 6 meetings with them. They're scheduled monthly, but we only hold them when we have really important or significant updates. And we also plan to hold these meetings through the end of the study period. And last but not least, on this slide, we have meetings with the technical stakeholder group, which is you folks here today. Thank you again for coming. We had our first meeting on April 12th, so earlier this year. And now our second one, which will be our final technical stakeholder group meeting until the webinar, is today. And we hope to collect your feedback today and incorporate them into the interim report. Our other engagement coordination efforts include ongoing collaboration with CSU, the COAST program. We've had discussions with Geosyntec. We have regular meetings with SWRP. We've met with CAL FIRE to ask them about how prescribed burns work and hoping to integrate that information. But I think ultimately we learned prescribed burns probably weren't the way to go, but that was still valuable information for us. And of course, we're always looking for more collaboration opportunities. So for phase 4, so far, we've collected a list of site visit locations. The current effort is currently paused as we are experiencing some funding challenges. So if we have the funding to do so, we will do a site tour, but as it stands, we've currently paused it until then. Phase 5, this past fall, well, this past now, 2 months ago, month and a half ago, we had the 2023 State of the LA River Watershed, which we at CWH hosted at the Autry Museum, where Matt was able to present the study presentation at during the wildfire breakout session. And we're always looking for more presentation opportunities. So if you hear any good opportunities where study might be a great inclusion, please let us know. And finally, scheduled for about fall of next year, we will have a concluding study webinar, and it will be open to all parties, including technical steering group, TAC, public, anyone who's interested, where we'll go over the study results and incorporate any final feedback that that folks have. And here are some photos. That's Matt at the presenting at the 2023 State of the Watershed, and as well as the other folks on the panel. Those folks included Pete Holgemuth from U.S. Forest Service, Scott Houseworth from CSUN, as well as Katie Delaney from the National Park Service. And it ended up being a really great little discussion because everyone touched on the Woolsey fire, and so that was a really fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time, but it was a really good panel. And that said, just wanted to know thank you for coming, and just opening the floor for any questions and feedback on the engagement plan.
So I guess I'll just start in rather than raising my hand. What kind of comments do we refer to? Me, this is still driving a regulatory question, pollutant capture, loads, that kind of thing. What kind of comments did we receive from the water board to the modeling outline, to the study outline? Where did they think somebody, and I'm going to say MS4 permittees are primary category in my mind, might someday utilize what your outcome becomes?
Yeah, Matt or Brianna, do you guys care to jump in on these?
Yeah, I think I can take that initially, and then maybe Matt, if you have anything to add. So I will say in the regulatory meetings that we've had to date, there hasn't been significant kind of feedback on the modeling approach. And, our understanding, and we've always kind of made this clear in terms of, as we're looking at those changes to the baseline loading, is to factor in if there is a potential suspension period after fires where we're seeing that a lot of the loading or exceedances potentially are coming from those burned areas. So that's sort of been the intent. I will say we haven't gotten too far in kind of what you're mentioning, Jerry, of the discussions of how the board sees potentially using the data and the modeling outcomes.
Matt, before you respond, when you say suspension, aerial or liquid suspension?
No, so when I say suspension, I actually mean in terms of the timing. So something like a high flow suspension with bacteria, something like a similar framework is what we've sort of discussed with the fires, where you're seeing the timing of when these fires happen, and there's maybe a quick spike in metal concentrations that you might see if it's sort of a similar suspension of that regulatory requirement at that time.
And I'm not saying it's the same thing at all, but they do give latitude, our regulatory friends, for example, waste disposal often following a fire. So there is some precedent for that.
There's also precedent that actually Don Petschauer found in terms of the industrial permit. There's similar language in there that actually is directly related to some of these fire impacts.
All right, thank you. Matt, if you want to say something, please. I'm not trying to block you.
Not at all. No, Brianna covered it. Yeah, I mean, I think that industrial permit language is, that is very interesting, and I think that something like that may be one potential pathway. But no, I don't really have anything to add to what Brianna covered.
Yeah, I guess for my own input, and I would certainly welcome some of the other technical committee folks' inputs on it. For me, I'm kind of a data-driven person. I, look at history better than the future. I'm a history person, I guess, not a professor. And I'm trying to think of how the heck to deal with it. Is this going to drive our BNPs to be bigger? And then we find out we went in the wrong direction, or are we looking at maybe this is the stuff coming out of the mountains and we look at debris basins being constructed differently? My comfort level, and I think I've said this before in one way or another, is less for this kind of work. And it's nothing to say about, the validity of your study or the importance of your study. It's just my comfort level. I'm an old guy. My comfort's going down. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, Jerry. And I mean, we do take that seriously. We want to make sure that this, the whole point of this is to provide benefits for the co-permittees and for water quality, right? And that's really our focus in the long run. And we realize that, that information in some cases can be used in the wrong way or how it wasn't intended. And that's, we're really trying to keep an eye out for that and try to make sure that we provide, genuinely beneficial information that can help make good decisions and improve water quality is really the goal here.
I guess I'll say quickly, my silence is not, not appreciation for the work you've done. It's trying to figure out how to invite that work into my psyche.
Yeah, and I think, Jerry, as we continue to have the TAC meetings, obviously we don't have those model results yet, but we'll make sure that as those results start to come out, that we're continually checking in, with the TAC and in terms of the interpretation and that use. And I think as we get further along with the study, the conversation exactly that you're talking about will kind of further evolve.
I don't mean to monopolize the conversation at all. I apologize if it feels that way on occasion. We were looking at nutrients, and we were looking at as a fluvial concentration, a flowing concentration, correct? And nutrients is one of those funny things where we get a fluvial, but then we go to the lakes where so many of the nutrient TMDLs exist. And it's a resuspension issue as our dear fishy friends put the stuff back into the water. And I'm not criticizing it. I'm trying to figure out if there's another way to compare it. I mean, I can understand where we don't see much chlorophyll in flowing water. The chlorophyll probably is more of a lake issue, and it may be an entirely different season. I think for Peck Road, it was a summer measurement rather than a winter measurement. Was our TMDL requirement. Different study, so different thing. But just trying to make sure I'm thinking of the right things, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Any other questions, feedbacks, comments on the engagement portion of this study? Okay, hearing none, we just have a couple slides left, and then we can have any continuing discussion.
I'll ask a quick question. Who from the board have we had participating or ended up participating in your meetings?
I'm sorry, I missed the first piece of that, Jerry. Can you say it
Sure.
again?
Who from the water board has participated in your meetings?
I can answer that. We've met with Emily Duncan quite regularly, as well as Elijah Wakefield on occasion, but mostly Emily Duncan. That is our primary contact with the water board, with the regional board.
Okay, moving on. There we go. We have completed a draft interim report. You should all have this. If you don't have a copy of this draft interim report, please contact us right away. We've asked for comments back by this Friday, the 17th, and I suppose we could make an exception if there's a real case, but we would like to have comments back soon. If you would like to review this before the interim report is finalized, please let us know so we can get you a copy. And the interim report, here's a basic outline. We talk about basically kind of the same thing we did through this this presentation here today, and go through all that, obviously in much more detail. Obviously the references are all in there and so on. And so this will be followed by, again, we're doing year 2 of the monitoring. Brianna's wrapping up, getting more and more data to really refine and finalize that model. The final report will be drafted approximately a year from now, and then finalized in early December or so of 2024, and that'll be the end of the study. So, so again, the interim report is out, and when it's finalized, it will be made public. So it should be available to you. And again, if you have any trouble, please contact me or any of us on the team, and we can certainly get you a copy. And next steps haven't changed much. Of course, we're always watching. That's why we're out there right now, is because we're hoping to get rain. I'm not sure what it's looking like in Pasadena or Glendale right now, but hopefully it's raining, because we're trying to get some samples out there. Obviously, we're watching for any fires that come up. We don't want to have wildfires, but then again, if they do, we certainly want to take the opportunity to try to get some data directly from them. We continue to do quarterly reporting, the interim report and final report and so on, monitoring, modeling. We do still really hope to do a stakeholder tour of the lakes and historical burn sites or some BMPs, as Bell was talking about. We'll see if we're going to be able to make that happen or not. It'd be a great thing to do. Still a little iffy on whether we can get everybody together all at the same time for a productive in-person kind of tour. We'll have the final report next year, and of course we'll do a presentation available to the public on that one. And then the draft LA County water plan. I'm not quite sure where that one came from. Brianna, are you aware why that would, what we're doing with that one?
No.
Okay, well, in any case, we're going to be at least reviewing that. And I'm sorry. I believe a new draft of that is coming out, and we want to take a review of that to see how it may coincide. And I apologize, I wasn't quite sure where that one came from. But yeah, there is a new draft coming, and we want to make sure we understand that, and then again see how any fire studies or wildfires would fit in with that. And with that, that completes our presentation. So we're happy to and would love to have as much discussion as you all wish. I think this meeting was scheduled for 2 hours, I believe. It's been about 1, so we may run a little short on, or we may have plenty of time left over for any discussion. So any further questions, comments, or anything else?
Your conclusions for the report, you might want to be thinking a little bit about what might be some subcategories within that. I guess I'm having my difficulty of thinking about the future and the present and the transition between the two. So there may be some things that are more immediate conclusions or recommendations, and then maybe further off in the future, and probably regulatory guidance or pathways. Brianna's heard me say regulatory pathways too many times over the years. Might be a useful thing in there, because I feel sometimes we're trying to react to things many years, things that are already done. And maybe this might be an opportunity for trying to come up with some suggestions of how we can evolve this process rather than react to the process. And last I checked, the alert gauges still weren't recording, but there was a lot of orange cells, so I'm not sure why alert wasn't giving us anything yet.
Okay. Well, Jerry, if you have the interim report, right, and if you could give us any comments on that, or if you could include some of those comments on the conclusion section of the interim report, that'll help us make sure that we get them into the final report draft the way you're looking for the first time.
Okay.
And it looks like I believe I'm going to stop sharing. It looks like there is in the chat. Let's see something. Oh, so Monrovia, it's coming down raining. Excellent news. Great. I'm glad to hear it. Okay, we have anybody else? Any other comments, questions? Any thoughts about the study overall? We think we're going to get some great information out of it. Do you think it's going to go the wrong way? Just anybody has any thoughts about where we're going? Okay, well, not hearing anything. Belle, what do you want to think? Do you think if there's no discussion, should we
Yeah,
close
you
the
know,
meeting?
yeah, we can do that. I'll just say, you know, if you guys have any further questions or something comes to mind later on, feel free to email me or anyone on the study team. If you guys want to send in your comments, you can send that via email through whichever any format you feel comfortable doing. You can just send an email. You could make a draft, comments, you know, we'll take any of those forms. And if you have, you know, any additional comments or anything, we'll be, you know, we can chat anytime if you're open for collaboration or if you have suggestions for other collaboration opportunities. And I guess the next time we'll be seeing you guys, or you'll be getting an email from us. If you're not on the TAC, would be our final report at sometime next year. And I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you all again. Thank you very much for your time
Oh,
and your interest in
got-
this study.
We got one comment from Priya. She's on the cusp of getting the ICP-MS up at CSUN. So that's really exciting. And then after that, they'll be able to share data for metals for the whole Spoolsy landscape. So we'll be excited to hear that, and we look forward to working with you on sharing data.
Excellent. Yes. Yes. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Feel free to contact us anytime. And if we'll see you next year, if not sooner.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.